Hello and welcome to my review of The Saliva Tree by Brian Aldiss. The Saliva Tree was the 1965 Nebula Award winner for Best Novella. The Saliva Tree is also a Wellesian alien invasion story set at the turn of the century, the last days of the Victorian era, and it follows Greogory Rolles and Bruce Fox, residents of East Anglia and self-proclaimed big thinkers, which translates as little doers, and it is on one such evening spent big thinking that the two witness a meteor shower, which are rarely the harbingers of positivity in science fiction. A meteor seems to land locally on the Grendon farm, and Rolles is friendly with them, discussing all things socialist with Farmer Grendon, and on friendly, if not amorous terms with their daughter, Nancy, much to the ire of her potential suitor, farmhand Bert Neckland. The Grendons, though, are too busy farming to take much interest in things extraterrestrial. But as with all good socialists, Greogory has little to do, so he borrows a boat and goes out on the lake to see if he can find where the meteor came down. Instead, he has a scary experience with an invisible force that tries to capsize the boat, but he wards that off with a successful swing of an oar. However, it's not long before the farmer's dog takes an interest in the invisible forces working around the pond and winds up dead. Neckland takes the opportunity to warn Greogory away from Nancy. Greogory retires to the pub with Fox, who says his story is the jolliest thing he has read since Sherlock Holmes. Meanwhile, the Grendon farm is shrouded in a stinking dew. Despite that, things on the farm are going very well. The harvest is plentiful and the beasts of the farm are having large litters. Perhaps, with all the youngsters in the air, Greogory takes a shine to Nancy and asks if she would be receptive to him courting. She is unimpressed with his socialist, i.e. listless, lifestyle. While he is there, something attacks the piglets, reducing them to empty husks. Greogory heads into the local city, Norwich, to look for some books and finds one on snakes, connecting the deaths on the farm to snake-like attacks. But while he's away, Mrs. Grendon gives birth to 9 children, making Christmas an extremely expensive proposition, I'm sure. Despite the bumper harvests, the Grendons are disappointed to find that much of the food produced is inedible. Greogory gets drunk with Fox and his friends, hearing that the Grendons have been in town trying to sell milk which has been rejected by all as rancid. Greogory returns to the farm after being stuck in the village by a week's worth of torrential rain, only to discover that, alone in the region, the rain has bypassed the farm. He also learns that Mrs. Grendon's 9 babies have all been killed, and that Mrs. Grendon herself is babbling insanely about having killed them. Mr. Grendon, perhaps grief-stricken, throws himself into his work, the bountiest of harvests, doubling his workload. Greogory, having not heeded Neckland's warning, ends up in a fight with him, but manages to point out an invisible force moving in and out of the pond. When they try to discuss this with Grendon, Neckland gets cold feet and denies it. Also, Greogory wants all of the farm workers to be involved in the discussion, but Grendon insists he's the boss of the farm and what he says goes. Fox, though, pays little attention to the warnings. Caught up in the story, he returns to the farm with Greogory and they decide to set a trap for the invisible aliens. However, as the aliens attack, Aldiss skips the action forward to the consequences, with Greogory relating what happened in a letter to none other than H.G. Wells. He then has a dream of a saliva tree in a mechanised future, which he takes as a warning and insists that Nancy come and stay at the local inn, which she does. However, away from the farm she falls ill, and it is only after a brief convalescence that she starts to recover. She relates to them the idea that her father had, that the aliens were here for the equivalent of a summer holiday, taking a break from their normal life and just having a bit of a picnic. Alarmed by the news from the farm, Greogory returns to make Grendon leave. However, in his mania, the farmer refuses, and when Nancy unhelpfully turns up to help, he tries to feed her to the pigs. There's an altercation interrupted by one of the aliens, which Greogory shoots with Grendon's shotgun. The beasts then leave. Biographer Willis E. McNally described Brian Aldiss as the literary heir to H.G. Wells, so there was no one more fitting than him to write this pastiche to Wells, which came out near the centenary of his birth, and, as mentioned, features the author in correspondence with Rolles, the protagonist. Certainly the menace-laden beginning with its unknown dangers drawing in the curious and gentlemanly hero seems very Wellesian. Aldiss recreates that tone in the late Victorian era very effectively. And when the novel ends with the hero lauding Wells's arrival in East Anglia with "one of the greatest men in England is here, there's no one more profitable for such a tale as ours," it's just as well we didn't slip a "new" in here, because those familiar with Colour Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft will have recognised already the wholesale borrowing of Lovecraft's plot. But Aldiss's affection for Wells gives the tale a fairly jolly undertone for the initiated. One of the earliest lines sets the standard. In these last years of the 19th century, from Aldiss, but very similar to Wells's, no one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century. But Aldiss takes it a step further in Gregory's letter to Wells, which includes this passage. "Once I thought it might even become a new Eden, growing the food of the gods for men like gods. Instead, alas, the first meeting between humanity and beings from another world has proved disastrous, and Eden is becoming a battleground for a war of the worlds." In less adept hands, this switching from the building peril on the farm to jovial asides, abetted by Fox's wry handling of his friend as well, might be jarring, but the Victorian trappings lend the whole thing a gentle tone that meanders rather than leaps through the changing moods. It is tense where it wants to be, imperiling an affable and caring lead and throwing in a love triangle-ish to boot, without any suggestion that one of the lines of the triangle is more than dotted. But in a tight running length, that all amounts to rather a lot going on. This is a busy text, with the visits to the farm punctuating the more personal moments with horror and threats of violence and insanity. It is absolutely a success in that regard, with honest Victorian mum Nancy and Gregory, a gentleman in the Jerome K. Jerome world, both easy to root for. With Fox adding a few precious moments of levity, the only suggestion of a misstep might be beginning the humans' fight back and then immediately cutting to the injured but very much alive Gregory relating how it all came to pass in flashback. However, that's a familiar enough Victorian trope, so what it takes away from the tension, it adds back in tone and mood. I'll go out on a limb and say that Aldiss is also having fun with the typical Wellsian protagonist. Gregory is a man of leisure, a sufficiently wealthy, upper-middle-class family having provided for an education at one of the Cambridge colleges, which seemed to mostly involve taking it easy, has now left him on the verge of a career. But which career? His days are spent, rather than considering this conundrum, at leisure and ending in the gentleman's club with Fox espousing his socialist ideals, all funded by a modest parental allowance. His adherence to this lifestyle threatens to scupper his courting of Nancy, first because he considers her beneath him, and then when he changes his mind she is less than thrilled, exclaiming, "But you don't do anything," and later calling him a layabout. If you thought middle-class socialists with an ingrained aversion to working only existed in fiction, you haven't been on Twitter lately. But I'm being unfair on Gregory, who at least tries to help the Grendon family, and unlike the Twitterati, seems capable of attempting to live up to his beliefs, and then even questioning them. He's convinced that space travel is the prerogative of the enlightened, that the stars are teeming with the best and brightest of enlightened socialist aliens, perhaps a reasonable assumption when you're writing halfway between Gagarin and Armstrong. I think some of the stars might be occupied by people, people who, perhaps they're better than us, live in a just society, wonderful people, which draws the rather mocking response from Fox, the cynic in the social group. I know, socialists to a man. Fox also points out that his stated intent of ridding the Grendon farm of the alien menace comes before he's had any real communication with them, that the death of the dog and the incident on the pond might actually be explainable. My point is this, Greg. You have gone completely back on your previous enlightened attitude. You are all for killing these poor things. Remember what you were saying about other worlds being full of socialists? Try thinking of these chaps as invisible socialists and see if that doesn't make them easier to deal with. Fox's scathing cynicism seems likely to get his friend killed, but adds a little mirth to the story. And when push comes to shove, the socialist and the capitalist travel to the farm to work together against the aliens, irrespective of their political beliefs. Their weapon of choice, the pitchfork, seems appropriate for a revolutionary, even one whose beliefs waver when he has a hangover. But by the end, his experiences have left him questioning the utopian civilizations of the stars and who holds sway up there. Such races as dealt in love and kindness and intellect cowered forever on their little globes, while all about them went the slayers of the universe, sailing where they would to satisfy their cruelties and their endless appetites. Not perhaps a failure of ideology, but rather a disillusionment with progress. The first hint of things not being all they should are the meeting Gregory has with his uncle, whose pontificating reveals that he comes straight out of the Arthur Burling playbook. Realising his uncle is a windbag rather than the enlightened sage he'd always thought him, leads Gregory to question his education and lifestyle. His uncle's denial of alien involvement includes a denial of science and harks back to the Victorian preoccupation with ghosts. He says, "The modern age has gone to your head, but it's old-fashioned ghosts that have gone to your farm." But Gregory's dreams of the Saliva Tree are further indication of a belief that progress is not moving things in the enlightened way. Technology and progress are seen as unnatural and are mirrored in the uncanny goings-on at Grendon Farm. Here, as in the dream, it was as if agriculture had become industry and the impulses of nature swallowed by the new god of science. As with Lovecraft's short, the finale offers no real indication things will turn out for the best. The aliens, if they wish, will use us as we use farm animals. The only tool of progress that offers any hope of salvation is the firearm. James Blish, in More Issues at Hand, writes that Aldiss loves the English language with a profound and contagious passion and knows it far too well to be showy about it. And there is more than just the entertaining, well-judged pastiche of both Wells and Victorian mores. The description of the Grendon farm before Gregory goes out on the lake is really nice and foreshadows both the alien arrival and Gregory's own reconsidering of his views. Between barn and mill he could see the farmhouse, but the upper story only because of the lie of the land. Its decrepit humps of thatch and the tall stack of its chimney gave it a forbidding air. He mused on the strangeness that overcame one from looking at human works from an angle from which they were never designed to be seen. Likewise, Farmer Grendon's interest and incompetence in taxidermy has left his house full of strange and odd-looking creatures, which Aldiss pointedly calls monsters. The implication here as well being that science progress is moving in the wrong direction. Gregory looked doubtfully at these monsters, in which man's forming hand was more evident than God's. There were so many of them that some had overflowed into the parlour. In the best room, it was their deformity that appalled. Like the view from the lake, the twisted specimens reveals that the explosion of science in the farm has made it as unnatural as the arrival of the aliens. They, after all, do nothing more than put a new leader at the top. And there's a socialist text about that too. In conclusion, The Saliva Tree is a novella crammed full of ideas, characters and plot. On these three sturdy foundations, Aldiss builds tension, excitement and even squeezes in a few deft touches of humour. Gregory is a slice of Victoriana. Well judged and likeable, his romancing of Nancy is surprisingly good as an aside in this shorter text. His back and forths with both Fox and Neckland entertain in different ways, creating a dichotomy of friendship and animosity. There's enough human drama for a text twice as long, and that's before you add in the inhuman drama. Grendon's descent into obsession and mania, the decline from friendly tolerance of Gregory to unawareness of his own daughter could easily add another 100 pages. Both thoughtful and fun, it is an excellent slice of science fiction that thoroughly deserves its Nebula award. In fact, the only issue with the text is that, despite Blish's effusive praise of Aldiss as a writer, if you pick up Lovecraft's Colour Out of Space, I hope you'll agree that Lovecraft's prose is better. Aldiss, though, fleshes out his story with enough of his own that it is highly entertaining and easy to recommend. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more of this sort of thing. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.